Hello, I want to welcome everyone to the Power of Our Story. We are a community where veterans, first responders, and all protectors can connect, share their experiences, and heal together. Today, we welcome our guest storyteller, Brook Price. She is a warrior for mental health and suicide prevention. So, a little bit about Brook. She writes, "My name is Brooke, and I'm a wife, mom, grandma living in Chula Vista, where I grew up. I was a special education teacher for a few years before I had children, and for the past 12 years, I have been on staff at my church, working in children's ministry. My husband and I have been married 35, almost 36 years, and we have two grown daughters with families of their own. We also have a son in heaven. Mitchell took his life almost 7 years ago when he was 15 years old. Mitchell's death was a complete shock to all of us, family and friends alike. In the years since his death, my life has been a journey of coming to terms with the death itself and subsequently working to continue with a normal life myself. Part of that journey involved finding survivors of suicide loss about 6 months after he died. I attended local meetings regularly and found tremendous healing and comfort in talking with other survivors, other people who understood what I was going through. I became passionate about advocating for mental health awareness and helping others, and became a facilitator for SOSL support meetings about a year later. Now, nearly 7 years after the loss of my son, I continue to facilitate SOSL support meetings. I have organized mental health awareness and suicide prevention events for my church and lead grief recovery groups. I want to educate others about these issues and support those who have experienced the devastation of suicide loss. I want our mental health care to be better and more accessible. I want more people to receive effective care and hope that in some cases that care will ultimately save their lives. And I want survivors of suicide loss to see that there is hope for a future that is initially very difficult to see. So, Brooke, I just want to welcome you on today. Thank you so much for having the courage to come share your story.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So, a couple things that just sort of occurred to me in hearing you introduce yourselves and everything. First of all, tears are okay. I will say that. I say that to a lot of people, and I think part of that comes from when you go through a loss, whether you're dealing with grief through trauma. Um, One of the things that's really hard to deal with is you never know when the tears are going to come. And I think I've just kind of gotten to the point where I don't really care. I don't try to hide them as much anymore, because it's just all part of it. So I always tell people it's okay to cry. I might not, you might not, whether you do or not, it doesn't matter. That's just kind of part of it. So um, also, I think it's really hard to note that really important to note that, you know, one thing I've learned in this journey is just how prevalent suicide loss is. Um, a lot more so than I realized before my son died. And I think that with a lot of things in life, any difficulties you go through, if you start talking about them, which is very important to do, and I'll circle back to that, um, people kind of start coming out of the woodwork and you start having these conversations, and pretty soon somebody's like, oh yeah, that happened to me too, or I know somebody that, so I think the point is that whether you have personally experienced a close family member, friend, whatever, who's taken their life, whether you have or not, I bet you know somebody who has, or you're you're just a couple degrees away from it. So it's just a very prevalent thing, I've noticed. Um, I also think that the whole telling your story thing, I love that that's what you call this, because as you probably are all aware, telling your story is such a huge, huge part of healing from any kind of trauma, grief, loss, any of it. There's a lot of research to back that up. You have to be able to tell your story, and you have to be able to tell it in a safe place where people will listen and not judge you. And I think that's one of the things historically that's been so challenging with people who have suffered a suicide loss, because it wasn't something that people talked about, and it wasn't okay to talk about. I still meet people once in a while that they really haven't told anybody how their loved one died, or they've kept the fact that it was a suicide a secret. Um, in my particular case, I my son's death was so public so fast. I didn't have that option. Now, I don't think I would have tried to hide it anyway, because I am I think I'm a pretty transparent person. But it just that was not part of my reality at all, because everybody knew. We have a pretty tight knit community. I live out in the East Lake area, and Chula Vista is a funny city because we've got like, I don't know, 250,000 people here or something, but it doesn't feel like that, especially to those of us that grew up here. It still feels kind of like a small, tight knit community. And that's definitely how my neighborhood is. We've lived here for 26 years, 27 years, to my family in the house that we're in right now. And so my kids grew up here, same elementary school, sports, all that kind of thing. So it's a tight knit community. But just being able to, again, going back to just being able to tell your story, I think is just really, really huge. Um, as Sarah shared in the quick write up that I had, um, Mitchell is our third child. He We had our two girls, and then I had two miscarriages, and then we had the third one. No, we weren't trying for a boy. It just felt like we should have another baby. So, but he was just such a great kid. He was happy. He was such a typical third child. He was good at playing by himself. He took things apart way more than my girls ever did. I will tell you that right now. It's always disassembling it. In fact, I was pretty sure by the time he got to be about 16, he was going to have an entire car dismantled in our living room or something. But just a fun, nice kid. And not not popular in the way that he was like, Mr. BMOC, anything like that, but he was in the way that everybody just seemed to like him. He was just a nice kid again, and just wanted to make people happy. Would do anything to make people laugh pretty much. And it just he did not look at all like I would have thought somebody who was suicidal would look. Did not have the list of warning signs, red flags. Those weren't there. Um, and being our third child, we'd gotten two kids through high school, and, they were young adults. And so there definitely was okay, well, he's moody today. Teenagers are moody. I've seen this before, so, but there was nothing really dramatic. So, when he took his life, it was definitely a big shock to everybody. Um, I remember just being, the night that it happened, I kind of describe it like my brain locked up. I'm kind of a problem solver by nature. And so, if something goes wrong, I tend to, okay, what do we need to do? How are we going to get this back on the right track? And there was nothing. So it was like, yeah, it was kind of a weird experience. But yeah, so that just I got very passionate, as I said, about trying to, first of all, just learn and understand, because I think especially with suicide loss, you're just left with what happened. And of course, there's all the if I would have done this, if I would have done that, you know. It definitely is something that uh I think I think you're kind of destined to live with forever to a degree. Um, it's like those whispers are still there saying, oh, you didn't love him enough, or you didn't do this or that, or you didn't see this or that. In my logical mind, I know, no, that's not true. You know, this kid had a great life, a great family, tons of support. He knew we loved him. Um, but when you're dealing with an illness, that's not enough. I think one of the things I've kind of come to realize is that, you know, the whole mental health is health thing. And I do look at it more and more like physical issues. Um, and honestly, we were having this conversation in one of my support groups the other day, and just that, you know, if I get diagnosed with cancer, I'm gonna go to the doctor. I'm gonna get treated. I'm gonna pray. I'm gonna do all those things. None of those things are a guarantee that I will be healed. Some people recover from cancer, some don't. And I think the same is true with mental illness. I think that the earlier we can detect that something's going on, the better chances we have. We want to try to get treatments and find strategies and find things that work. But just because you get help isn't going to be a guarantee that there's not going to be a tragic end. And the conversation in the SOSL group that I was leading the other day was, you know, when you're part of a grief group, we're all there because our people didn't survive the illness that they had. You know, that's kind of the bottom line. But it's not to say that some people don't survive. And that obviously is the goal. And I think, again, just like, you know, cancer or any number of other physical um, ailments, the earlier you get help, the better chances you have of recovery. Um, I got connected with SOSL about 6 months after my son died. And it was just a place where all of a sudden I felt like, okay, these people get what's happening in my life and they understand. And so that was tremendously healing to me. And I started attending groups. That would have been summer of 2018. And then by the fall of 2019, I was asked to help facilitate that group. So that's kind of what started that journey there. So, do you guys have any questions for me?
You know what? I'll go ahead. Um, so, Brooke, I just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. It's I know from losing my dad, I do think it's very different to imagining losing a child than a dad, but I do understand enough that it is a very complicated grief. And you know, I'm really curious to about you said something about mental health. I know just from hearing so many stories, sometimes at that age, kids are, especially boys, are so impulsive that it could be just one of those days, something terrible happens, you know, whether it's with a girl, a relationship is a big trigger. It could be anything. And then maybe just that impulsiveness that is in a child's wiring um, can end a life. Or you talked about the mental health. Did you see that? Was he struggling with mental health? Um, no. Do you think it was more of an impulsive act? Maybe he had a really bad day or
Well, I think there's two things. First of all, I did just see something pop up in the chat. SOSL is Survivors Suicide Loss San Diego. And that's it's a group that it's interesting because it's a local group in San Diego, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It's lost survivors supporting other lost survivors. And we run like 21, I think we're up to 21 support groups throughout the month. Some of them are on Zoom, some of them are on in person. And And we also do community events. We go out and do resource fairs sometimes. We also do provide response. We go to groups of people, school groups, or people who have just lost somebody, and do sort of early, early response to crisis. So we do a variety of things. So that's what SOSL is. Back to your question, Sarah. Yeah, it's interesting because definitely there were no overt signs, ahead of time. I do think that there was an impulse factor in my son's death. Absolutely. Um, he was a kind of an impulsive kid, as a lot of boys are, especially that age.
That's
So,
right.
and in general with suicide prevention, one of the things that we try to get across to people is that, if you start kind of spiraling into that moment, anything you can do to break your train of thought, whether it's walk outside for a few minutes or make yourself a sandwich or something, just anything to break that train of thought. Sometimes that is enough to help you survive that particular, moment, to the point where you can get some help someplace else. So I definitely think there was definitely, an impulse component to that. However, I think he was also really, really good at hiding whatever was going on inside his head. I think the bottom line is his brain was lying to him. Um, I was lucky in that he did leave a note, which might sound kind of strange, because I've talked to plenty of people who were lost survivors that didn't get a note, and they were like, "No, I'm kind of glad we didn't have one." In my case, it wasn't that the note provided any big answers to anything, which is, of course, what you're looking for in the beginning. But what it did, it was very clear by the things he wrote in the note that his perception of himself was not the perception that the rest of the world had with him. Um, again, he was just a kid that everybody liked. And, he talked about being a disappointment. And it's like, "Well, what are you talking about?" So again, that's how I put it. His brain was lying to him. And that's very obvious to me. Um, the only other clue that we had was a friend of mine found a Twitter account that it was a private account. He didn't have any followers. It didn't follow anybody, and it's I'm still not 100% sure that it was him because it didn't have his name on it, but there were so many things about it that it was like, yeah, no, that was him. And there was a post that he had early in December. He died December 28th. And there was a post he'd made early in December. And there was, like I said, there was nothing else on that Twitter account. He didn't write stuff, didn't follow people, didn't have any followers. But it was just something like, "I'm just so tired. I just can't do this anymore."
Mhm.
And there were a couple people that responded with, the things that you're supposed to respond, no, you're, get help, whatever. But that was the end of it. And that makes me think that, again, I do completely believe that was him. And that tells me that I think that it had been something he was contemplating. So, yes, I think that night that he did it, there was some impulse, there was an impulse factor, but I think it was something he'd been contemplating for a while. I think had honestly, he honestly believed, because his brain was telling him lies. I think he honestly believed that our lives would just be better and easier without him.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yeah, again, I'm so sorry, Brooke. I think this could be anybody's child, anybody's son. What teens have to deal with, um, the pressures, especially with boys. I have four sons, the I really feel for that. I feel for kids in general today so much. And I just want to commend you for giving people a chance to see a different perspective, kids to see a different perspective of how they can reframe things or take that break if they're on that track of thinking that there's no hope. Or I just, you're really using your loss and your suffering to help educate other people in the chance that maybe somebody will hear it in the right time, or educate the masses so that we're more supportive, we're more aware, we can spread the message. So um, yeah, how are your daughters and your husband? How are they dealing with Mitchell?
All
With
in different ways, which I think is I think that's another thing about grief, navigating that as a family because um the relationships are all different and people are just different in how they respond. Um, I think that as far as my husband is concerned, well, I'll just preface this by saying all of us, I think, are definitely on a path to healing, and we're doing okay, and we miss him, and it's sad. And every family event that we have, one of my daughters got married since Mitchell died. We've had four babies born. My girls have had four babies between the two of them. Um, because there's always that he should be here. He would have been a great uncle, it would have been he should be here. But you know, there's always that, but everybody I think is on their own path of healing. I think one of the biggest challenges with me and my husband was just that we did respond very differently, especially initially, and we still do, but that's really normal. And you kind of have to figure out as a family, how do you walk that line between supporting each other and giving each other the space to grieve the way that you need to grieve. Um, Probably not a real big surprise. I am a talker. And one of my daughters is wired more like I am in that aspect. So, we talk a lot about a lot of feelings and all the things and that's fine. I know that there are, especially initially, I couldn't say some of those things to my husband because he just wasn't in a place where that was helpful or healing. It was more hurtful to him. Um, he's to the point now where I think, we'll start sharing memories and he's starting to be able to have some happy memories. It was hard for him at first even to really look back and reflect on Mitchell's life at all and not just be sad and angry, really angry. He was very angry. I was angry, but not angry at our son. And I can't really explain why that is because that's a very, very normal, typical reaction. I just didn't feel that. So, yeah. And then my other daughter is wired more like my husband and like, well, I don't want to talk about it because talking about it makes me sad and I don't want to be sad. So, but but I think everybody has gotten to a point where they've talked the amount that they needed to. And I think everybody is moving forward with their lives and living life in a way that they know that Mitchell would want them to live, I guess I'm gonna put it.
Well, I just thank you. I thank you for using. I think from hearing hundreds of stories, I always just want to lift up the people who use their pain to help this world. And that is definitely what you're doing. The most amazing people that I have met are people who have suffered so deeply and are willing to share to help other people and be part of the solution in this world. So I just want to thank you, Brooke. Um, I want to go ahead. I think, Scott, you had your hand up first. You,
Yeah, hey, Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I did. I posted it in the chat section, and Brooke saw it and addressed it. That was about, what SOSL stood for and whether it was a national organization. So, from what I understand, it's local,
It is local,
correct?
but I will say that because COVID forced us all to go digital, we all the meetings were on Zoom for a while, and now they're about half and half. Because of that, even though it's a local group, the access, I mean, I've literally had people call in from not only across the country, but I had a person calling in regularly from Singapore every month. So
Wow.
it's the reach is worldwide for people who are willing to deal with the time difference. So yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. That's an option, for folks, a resource. So, uh, are you okay if we share that with others that may want to call in or
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You
okay?
know, Floyd Strayer is a facilitator with Survivors of Suicide Lost San Diego, and he is always on the bottom of our weekly email. So just so you know, that name is actually with Survivors of Suicide Lost San Diego. That's an organization that I was with and I stay connected with now.
Oh,
So yeah, so he's always on, he facilitates groups for veterans and maybe for just men right now too. I can't remember exactly what his role in particular is now.
It was just men, and I think it's law enforcement and military. I'm not sure if they have women in that group or not right now, but
Oh,
it's military and law enforcement.
and and the email is there so that they can always be forwarded to some other group if it's not, his group that he's facilitating. So there is a connection email there.
right. But I don't think anyone does it say specifically what that connection is, or is it just an email? I didn't. I mean, it's fine that I didn't know that, but I'm just saying this is a realization through our discussion now. But so to that end, is it possible that um, after this is recorded in the description of the YouTube video, could that information be put in the if Brooke's okay with it, just so that folks see it's a potential resource for folks. I don't want to blow up your your group with all these folks jumping in, but
Oh
you know,
no, no, that's fine. Yeah, yeah. And I mean honestly, most people wind up attending support meetings and coming for a season and then they kind of drop off and that's kind of the goal, I think,
sure,
to get to
sure.
the point where you're handling life and you don't need necessarily go to those meetings just to get through. So I put the website soslsd.org in the chat there. So yeah,
Oh,
definitely recommend
And
that
I
to any.
will put it in the description on the YouTube
yeah.
to make sure. And I'm
Sarah,
uh
I know you know where I'm going with this in my mind. Certainly there's a lot of folks in our area here that served in the military, right? We're one of those places geographically where there's just a lot of folks that wind up staying here. So there's a, you know, big group of those folks, but there's also, I think we're like the number one state. We go back and forth with Texas between how many veterans are, living in the state. Then when you add in the folks that are currently serving, there's a lot of folks that, have these struggles. And the military right now, it's been for a number of years, are having, high numbers of suicide. So, good resources are exactly that. So it's, nice to be able to share with folks. And thank you, for what you're doing. Just like Sarah was saying, the strength involved in turning around and helping others is tremendous.
yeah. Thanks, Scott. I'm actually going to recheck the email because I think it does say survive SOSL, and maybe that's not very clear. I'll recheck that to see how it's worded. But thank you. Thanks for bringing that up, Scott. Paul.
Um, Thank you for the courage to share your story and the concerns that you've shared. Um, Part of what I heard from you is some survivor's guilt. And that always is framed in statements like, I should have, I could have, I would have, things. Um, and statistically, for every suicide adult, there are approximately 135 people who are affected by it in one way or another, directly or indirectly. It usually starts with the cops and the firefighters showing up at the scene, because until they know otherwise, it's a crime. And then it goes to ER, and then obviously to the coroner, and the list just. Um, but I would like to offer you this. If you ever feel like there's some doubt in your mind about what the comments were on that Twitter account, I can identify the source, and
Okay.
I'd be happy to do that for you.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you. I might take you up on that.
Well, please feel free to do so, because I look for a lot of people that don't want to be found, runaway teens and that kind of thing. So, I have schooling at university level in cyber forensics and computer forensics. So, I'd be happy to do that for you.
Okay. Thank you.
You're
Appreciate it.
welcome.
All kinds of interesting things come up with these conversations with people with law enforcement and first responders and veterans. Thanks, Paul. Does anybody else have any thoughts or comments, or would you like me to pause the recording? I'm happy to do that.
I just want to thank you, like Paul did, for just the courage to share your story, and for the fact that you share too the power of storytelling and healing, as you know did. And I'm with you on that 100%. That's what I do with military veterans and family members and families of the fallen is lead workshops on storytelling to help them find their voice and tell their stories. So it is tremendously powerful and healing. And like you said, there's scientific evidence, and we have a whole module that we talk about the science of storytelling and the healing and how the brain responds to storytelling versus just random facts. And so I think that's really, really wonderful that you see that and share that. And thank you for sharing your story. I mentioned in the beginning, I don't have an experience with it, but my youngest son came very close. He reached out to me while he was on a walk with a firearm. And fortunately, with the connections that we have, we were able to get him help within 24 hours. And yeah, and it's he's the one who is a veteran who served 6 years, and his he had several things. Of course, it's never just one thing. There are many things that kind of happen, but one of the things that none of us were aware he was struggling with, and I'm still to this day shocked that it didn't dawn on me that he would struggle with survivor's guilt, that his brother died in service and then he served, thinking that somehow that was going to make a difference or help. I don't think he didn't go in to be killed himself, but it was after all of those years he said to me that afternoon out in the woods that day, that he realized he felt he was the one who should have been killed in action and not his brother. He had his reasons for why it should have been him. But yeah, so there's usually many, many things. And I'm thankful that early intervention statistically is a good thing too, they say. So
Well, and I think that's the bottom line. There's never a simple answer. If there was a simple answer, no one would die this way, And I think that's why a lot of people ask questions, and you see it with other things too. I can remember when my mother-in-law died of cancer, they were initially, oh, well, what was her diet like? Because she had colon cancer and and I think people ask a lot of those things out of fear because in our brains, we want to know like that one reason that that bad thing had happened. And as long as we know that one reason, then we can not do that and we can protect ourselves and the people we love from having that bad thing happen. And I think that's why people struggle so much with, all the questions and, as far as asking other people, well, did they do this? Was it that? With it? And it's like it's not that simple, you know.
What good insight, though, from you. That could be so offensive to you. And it sounds like your heart is just so tender and open and loving that you're not taking that negatively. That would be tough. People ask questions that could be offensive.
Well, I do have to say, I honestly, one of the things that I prayed for very early on was just to be protected from dumb things people say. And for the most part, I mean, I've heard some horrific things that people have said to other people, but I haven't had anything terribly hurtful or, being said directly to me. So I'm very thankful for that. Yeah. And
That's
I wanted to say one more thing about the whole telling your story thing. I had an interesting experience with a friend recently. She had a completely different kind of trauma. She was hospitalized. She had botulism of all things, so she was completely paralyzed. She was in the hospital for 71 days. It was quite something, but she recovered. But the thing that she said to me recently is she was talking about meeting somebody who didn't know about her illness, and she said, "You know what I realized? I don't need to talk about it anymore." And she goes, because I talked about it a lot and I don't need to talk about it anymore. And I think that's the point the goal is to get to that point where it's not that it's not still, it's always going to be part of our story, those traumas, but it doesn't have to define us forever, you know? So.
Thank you, Brooke. Those were great points. And I think that's really true. We have found that on the power of our story too, that people kind of flow through. And then there's people that stick around so that they can help other people. Specifically, they want to do that. Yeah, there's definitely a point. I feel that with my dad too, with the loss of my dad. I feel very passionate about giving people a place to share their story while they're working through it because I don't want people suffering in silence and suffering alone because you never know what can happen when people are isolating. But I have found that too for myself too. I feel very healed, and I always want people to know that there is hope. There's always hope of not even just surviving, but thriving. And we do see that a lot, on this platform. It's the support, it's being able to have the time in a judgment-free zone where people get it, even if it's not exactly the same trauma. Um, but anyway, yeah, thank you for the points that you just shared. Rich?
Brooke, thank you for sharing Mitchell with us today. Um, I lost five DEA partners and a secretary all through suicide. One of them was, well, two of them, but one was particularly disturbing because he had an argument with his daughter, and his daughter supposedly said to him, "I hope you get killed." He went out that afternoon and took his life. And I mean, I just can't imagine how his daughter, you know, after that, and it's tough. The other one, very close to, he was getting ready to teach local cops on how to survive on the street. And that morning in his hotel room, he took the gun, put it right to his heart, and killed himself. And I think he did that because he wanted to have he had kids. He wanted to have an open casket. But Chuck was unbelievable. I mean, he was a captain in the Marine Corps. He did 2 tours in Vietnam. He was as tough as nails, and for him to go that way, that was really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But thank you for sharing Mitchell with us.
Yeah. Thank you, Rich. And then Scott?
Yeah, kind of on the same plane or line as Rich. That I've got two things here. One, I had a family member that committed suicide. He had been struggling. It was identified. He had gone in and out of facilities. He'd been on medication, and he was married, had two young boys, had a third on the way, and he just couldn't get past the things he was struggling with, and that was hard on everybody, for obvious reasons. But the sons have really struggled with, you know, why didn't he stay around? And they were little, but they had doubts about things, right? And even today, they still struggle with that. So, but the other one, I was a battalion commander. It was my last 2 years in the Marine Corps. I was a new battalion commander, and there was a young Marine in our admin shop that I won't go into all the details, but it was like, okay, something's going on here. And then when I pulled the string, holy smokes, so we spent a lot of time doing everything we thought was right, and we even went beyond in some cases to where I confiscated all of his weapons and I put them in the armory. I didn't really have the authority to do that, but whatever. So we put them in our armory, locked them up. I gave them custody cards. So, when we get past all this, they're here. They're not going anywhere, and we had, we got him help. He went into, facility for a while. He, twice with him too. Uh, Everyone came alongside him. But in the end, he went out and bought a handgun, because he didn't have access to his. And that's how it ended. And so you never know what's going to happen. I mean, if they've made up their minds, and they're not showing signs, that's got to be really difficult to deal with, because it's like a what the heck, but all that said, it's just, it could be the most toughest person that you would never think that this would even be on their mind, and it happens. So what does that say? To me, it says that, whatever's going on in their head, it's definitely a chemical issue, or that, they're just not thinking clearly. And so to be in that amount of, extreme thought, it just overrides their system, so that they wouldn't do, something that they're just going to do something they just wouldn't do if they were, in a steady state of mind. And it's gut wrenching, for sure. But all that's to say is we can't second guess ourselves, especially when we're good people and we're good parents. And, so yeah, thanks.
And I think the bottom line too is that, with anybody who takes their own life, there is a loss of hope there. And again, there can be many, many different factors, but I think the bottom line of their thinking is that how I feel now is how I will feel for the rest of my life. This is never going to change, and I can't do this anymore. And again, everything leading up to that can be completely, I'll have a whole lot of variables there. I think that's why trauma survivors, survivors of suicide loss, military, law enforcement, people who get exposed to a lot of trauma, I think are more susceptible to taking their life, because again, I think people get in this mode of this is terrible. I can't live like this, and I'm never going to get better. And so I think that's kind of the commonality there.
And there's huge consequences too by opening up for military and law enforcement, so Yeah, it's such a complicated thing. And I just think, anybody who's watching this, if you know anybody who has survived a suicide loss, especially a child, please, please use your head, use your heart. If you can imagine how incredibly difficult this could be, please be somebody who is supportive. And if you don't know how to be supportive, then ask somebody else. But I just can't, I just, to me, it would be such a horrible thing to add a weight to a parent or a sibling after something so incredibly difficult. I think not everybody is as strong as Brooke. Brooke, you're a strong woman. You have a strong family. You have a strong surrounding, and not minimizing the pain at all, not minimizing at all, but your strength as just a person, you exude that. And again, you have the support like of your church community, of your family. Um, and just, and again, I'm not minimizing what you went through, but just imagine somebody having that weight when they're not maybe a very strong person to begin with, too. You can imagine, I think that's why there can be a ripple effect of others taking their lives after because they feel hopeless or they don't know how to talk or, who do I talk to? So I just, again, I want to thank you for navigating your way through to resilience and then being part of the solution, being a voice for those who have suffered so much. Um, is there anything that you want to respond to that before I go on to Paul? Do you feel that I articulated that in a realistic way?
Yeah, I would just add that any strength that I have is not my own. It comes from my faith. So,
And speaking of which, you did say that you have a group, a grief share group or a grief group at your church, and that you're also trying to help with mental health and helping people with surviving suicide loss in a faith-based arena, also on top of SOSL. Is that something that we can post also, that if people of faith want to be in that community? Do you
yeah,
have?
absolutely. And Grief Share that is a national program, and there are churches and groups all over the country that run it. You can go to their website is griefshare.org and look for a group in your area. It's a 13-week class, and it just has very, very good. It is faith-based, but I have plenty of people that wind up joining that group that don't come from a faith background. And so, again, there's the faith component, which I do think is important. But even if that's not where your beliefs lie, there's a tremendous amount that you can get just as far as the day-to-day practical navigating grief and, coming to a place where you're living life again.
I'm really glad to hear this too, Brooke. I actually had an experience about 12 years ago where I was taking a son's friend, she was a girl in high school, to a grief share. And
Mm,
because her dad was just killed. So
mm,
I said, why don't we go to this group together? And to be able to be part of it, I shared that my dad had died by suicide. And her response, it kind of shocked me. I was okay, but she goes, we don't talk about that here. And I thought, oh my goodness, like, what if this was raw? What if this was fresh?
oh,
And to hear that you're leading a grief share group, and it's really good to hear that that's becoming more of a conversation, even in the faith-based. Although you said it's open to everybody, but
but yeah, no, I completely agree. And in fact, let's see, it's been a couple. I've led several sessions of grief share now, and this I've used the past two. They just redid the curriculum again, so this is the fourth volume of it that I'm using now, and it's gotten better each time, I think. And especially the one that has just been published this year, is much more much more transparent and open about talking about both suicide deaths and overdose deaths, which I think are very important because they're really prevalent in our society. So it's definitely something that's faced head on in that curriculum now. So yeah.
That's good. That's really good to hear. Yeah, I would hate for somebody to feel even
Yeah.
more shame, right? I mean, that's really good to hear. Good for them. Okay. Paul?
Yeah. Um, these are all topics that have come up in the course of this conversation and reminded me of things. The first thing that at some point you want to separate the event from the emotions that are attached to it, because that is a way to reframe the event, but not change it. And all you're changing is the way you're responding to it. And I think that that can be very helpful. The second thing is, and I've been known to say this so to a lot of people, but it turns out that hope is exactly the last thing we lose before we swallow the mussel. And identifying somebody who is hopeless or feels hopeless sometimes can be done simply by your presence, simply by a smile, a willingness to listen rather than here to respond. And I think those things are all pretty important. But there's one thing in psychology that you learn fairly early on, and that is the notion of interrupters. When somebody is at a mindset that is destructive to them or to others, if you can interrupt that pattern, sometimes it's humor, sometimes it's force. Doesn't matter what it is. If you can interrupt it, you'll bring an end to it, at least for that time being, and then they can get help beyond that. But I share those for whatever they're worth.
Well, and I think that's a really, really good point that um the being there, the listening, all of those things, those are really, really important. And again, because there's so many different, forms of mental illness, there's so many, you know, probably as many people that take their lives or attempt to take their lives, there's that many different individual situations and circumstances, right? And so, yes, we need to learn how to respond to people and how to talk to people. Sometimes that interruption is all they need, but it's not that because you're there and listening to somebody, they're fixed all of a sudden. The point is, it's kind of like a first aid thing. In fact, there's a really great class that is called mental health first aid. And it's all about what do I do so I can get this person the help that they need. Just as if, if someone drops in front of you and is having a heart attack or something, you give them CPR, not because you're going to heal them, but to keep them alive until the emergency personnel gets there. And it's the same with mental health first aid. Some of the strategies you talked about go right with it. It's talking to somebody, it's listening, getting them to that next step. So I think we tend to overthink so much in a lot of situations, but we get into the mode of, oh, well, I wouldn't know what to say and I don't know what to say and I don't, what I say doesn't help? And it's like, well, no, you're not trying to fix them. You're trying to get them to the point where they can get the help they need, hopefully, you know.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I just want to repeat what Rich said. Thank you for sharing Mitchell with us. Thank you for sharing your family and your journey with us. I think it's just been very informative. I think these conversations help us to be so much more sensitive and empathetic and compassionate and more thoughtful in how we respond to somebody who has survived something so very difficult. So, Brooke, you are truly a warrior, a spiritual warrior to have the strength that you have, as you have shared. And I just appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for your time and for listening.
It's great. Thank you.